let's take a few minutes of your time today to talk about systems thinking and systems-based approach to parenting. Um, so for me, parenting was something I never really gave a whole lot of thought to growing up. I was raised in a two-parent, Maine suburban, probably most people consider it rural upbringing, with I'd call it fairly normal. What I've started to understand is that there is no real normal upbringing, and that so much plays a role in the way children are raised and how they turn out and what that means as far as successful and happy children. It started to become a topic that I was really interested in when I had my own kids. So I have a almost 3-year-old, and a child that is now 7 days old. And so parenting is something that over the last couple of years I've given a lot of thought to, and I've been really interested in doing some research into what makes kids happy and what makes them grow up to be self-confident and successful, and what do those things look like. So what I'd like to do for my first open source essay as part of this class is I'd like to take a look at systems-based parenting from the view of Sharmer, Sanjay, and also with some help from The Danish Way of Parenting, which is a book that quite honestly my wife made me read, and has really changed the way I look at parenting and how we do things in this country versus how other countries handle parenting and what that looks like. So I think the first thing you have to do is define what makes a successful and happy child. And there's a lot of ways you could define that, but that's part of the first idea, or the first hurdle that needs to be covered or cleared. A happy and successful child, is that monetarily successful? Does that mean they get everything they ever want? Does that mean that they're always smiling, always playing? I think it's really hard to define that. I think if you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different answers on what will be a successful and happy child who becomes a successful and happy adult. And that kind of brings me to both Sharmer and Sanjay, where they talk a lot about vision and kind of envisioning what that future looks like. And I think one of the things that parents can struggle with, and that people in general struggle with, is they'll set a vision for themselves or for their children or for somebody important in their lives, and then they kind of allow that bar to be eroded. In the Sanjay book, The Fifth Discipline, he uses a lot of examples set economically. So he talks about unemployment rates and how full employment isn't actually full employment, and how we changed the definition of full employment in the 70s and 80s to account for less employment. So we could still say we had full employment even though the unemployment rate was higher than it had been before. And once you start to change those standards or those bars, they don't often go back. And I think that's one of the first things that you have to look at for parenting, is what is that bar, and how many times are you lowering the bar so that your kids can clear it. I don't mean that in a negative way or a accusatory way or a condescending way. Just, we all do it. We want our kids to be successful, and sometimes that means you have to lower the bar, and you have to have them be able to clear that bar. And especially in the United States, we really push a lot of making kids feel good about themselves, which is great. But you want to make sure they've accomplished something to feel good about. And the Danish do a really good job of applauding effort, but not overrating results, I guess is the way that I would put it. And so one of the ways that they do that is by reframing the issue and reframing what's going on. And so if your child gives you a drawing and it is objectively not very good, you're not going to say this is awful and you should never draw again. You'd reframe it, and you'd say, you'd ask questions. Why did you draw this way? And what was the intent of this part? And just try to get them to talk about it a little more. And in America, I feel like our kids, and I do the same thing with my kids. My 2-year-old gives me a drawing that he made. I tell him how incredible it is, and he's a great artist, and it inspires this idea that there's no improvement to be had, which is one of the ways that that it could be argued we're failing our kids is by not setting them up to be resilient, because we tell them that they're great at everything right from the beginning. So to kind of circle back, we have to start with a vision, and we have to have a vision of what successful and happy looks like. And I'm not here to tell you what your vision should be or tell you that you need to have the same vision I do, but try to create a vision of what you think that would look like for your child. And ideally what that's going to look like for an adult. What kind of adult do you want them to be? How do you want them to behave? How do you want them to see the world? What does that look like for you? And then in the fifth discipline, they talked about mental models and our mental models of how those things get done. And so everybody has these mental models, and they're really just, I guess mental model is kind of a hip phrase at the moment, but it's really just, how do I see the world? Are there ways that I see things that maybe I need to re-examine? And parenting has some of the oldest mental models. There have been parents as long as there have been people on this earth. Animals and anything else that has offspring, there's parenting philosophies. I don't want to limit to just people. But these mental models are built up over centuries and centuries of parenting. And so we get these ideas that things have to go exactly this way, and there's no other option, and this has to be done this way. And we, especially the way that the media gets, the way the media and our own families can kind of influence us, we feel like there's not options, and there's not different ways of doing things. And that's why I think sometimes in our own bubble we get a little bit caught up, and we need to kind of look at those mental models and re-examine them. And one of the ones that I know teenage families deal with a lot, the mental models of what it should look like. If you are, near and dear to my heart, if you're going to be an athlete, you need to play private sports, or you need to play in this travel league, or you need to be playing 17 games on a weekend because everybody else is. And we kind of get caught up in this mental model of our kids are only active and doing things right if it's organized by adults. And one of the most profound points in the Danish Way of Parenting book was that's not true. It's a lot of what kids need is free playtime, and not a lot of adults, not supervision. You want to make sure they're safe, but they don't need a lot of adult organization. They don't need a lot of being told how to play, or they don't need a lot of rules in their games. That it's actually better for their development if you let them create their own rules. Just free play and do what they want. Take risks, find their limits, so they know, you're not overprotective. You're not scheduling every minute of their day. You're giving them time to be themselves. And I think that's one of the big mental models in the U.S. that's really exploded over the last decade or more probably, is that we've taken our kids and we've overscheduled them, and every minute of their day is scheduled out, and it becomes an issue. But in a lot of parents' minds, their mental model of being involved and a good parent is having their kids involved in a lot of things. And that would be an example of a mental model that you could look at and try to change, and try to look back and say, well, why? Why am I doing this? What is the purpose? And I think a lot of parents, and myself included, before I started doing any of this research, just thought, and as a child, I was one of those kids who got scheduled out all the time. I was a game this night, a play this night, I was in a concert, I was in whatever I was in, because that's what my parents believed, was that this is exactly what I should be doing to create successful and happy kids. And so that's just an example. There's millions of mental models of parenting. You could look at the mental model of nutrition, what you're feeding your children, or you could go with the mental model of school and how their public education or private education, or whatever your mental model of those looks like, how those work. And I think it's an important exercise for parents to go through. Is I'm doing this, but why? Why am I doing this? What's the purpose? How is this helping my child? And if it's not helping your child, maybe it's something that you need to re-examine a mental model of. So I touched on the Danish versus United States child rearing differences a little bit, and I think it fits in so well with this idea of mental models, and Scharmer's U theory, just because it's so different. It's interesting because the vision isn't any different. They want their kids to be happy and successful and feel good about themselves and everything, but they go about it such a different way. And the interesting thing is that it's actually their mental models built up over centuries that have led them to this way of parenting. So the Danish are no different. They've been voted the happiest country in the world, I believe, 40 years straight, according to one study. And it's not that they are doing things in a way differently. They're doing things differently, but not in a specific way. They're doing them differently because that's how they've always done them. So it's interesting to see that a country that is, has less hours of daylight, has, objectively worse weather than most of the United States, is much smaller. It's not an economic hub. It's not a powerful country in any way. It's producing these children, these adults who are happy and successful and enjoy themselves. Whereas the United States, our numbers of people that are unhappy seem to go up every year. You could look at violent crime and the Danish parenting style and other issues, the other things. There are other parts of their system have led to much lower violent crime. It's led to happier people, lower rates of mental health issues, depression and things like that, or at least people that identify as being depressed, which again, lots of systems at play there that could be influencing why people are not identifying that way, or on the other side, conversely, are identifying that way in the United States. So, just a lot of differences, and at least this one book, this one source, has traced a lot of that back to the way that the kids are parented, and it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of Scharmer's U theory, like I brought up a little bit earlier, and so U theory, for those of you not familiar, it's shaped like a U, so hence the name. But it starts with co-initiating, and so you're uncovering common intent, and so it's part of this process to get you to the fifth stage, which is co-evolving, where you have a new practice that gets institutionalized. And so I think, or I believe that in the United States, a lot of people think we're at the point of co-evolving, or at least the fourth step of co-creating. And I just don't think that's true. I don't think we've had a break from our previous mental models. I think we've tweaked them slightly, and we're calling it something new. I think it dovetails nicely with how education has worked over the years, public education at least. Another thing that I'm pretty familiar with. We've had a lot of tweaks to how the education system works, but it's never been overhauled completely in a way that has benefited more kids than it did before. I think we've had, we have the introduction of special education law, or different differentiated classes, or some of the ideas around differentiation has helped, and it's made classes better and it's made schools better, but we're not really co-creating anything new. We're just tweaking the existing mental model. So for parenting, I'd actually argue that we're at the first step of co-initiating, and so we're uncovering common intent between what we all want. And I think that we're close to the end of that stage. As a group of, or as a country, or as a group of people, we understand what we want our kids to be, and whether that's clearly defined or not is questionable. But the next stage would be co-sensing, where we're connecting with diverse people and places to sense the system from a whole. And I think that's kind of, we've stalled there. I don't think we're understanding our system. So I think we have a lot of people, and for many different reasons, that don't, our systems are breaking down from what we had 60, 70 years ago. And whether that is breakdown of family, or people moving and spreading out further because travel is easier, or jobs have been spread out, take that how you will. But I think there's less familial bonds than there used to be, and maybe there are in the Danish way of parenting. They have really strong familial bonds, and those bonds are pretty close. And I think one of the things that we need to be able to do in the co-sensing phase of the U theory is we need to be able to observe our communities, and the bonds don't have to be familial, but they have to be. You have to understand the system that you're in and how best to use that system to your advantage, or the systems that are affecting your kids. If those of you not really familiar with the whole systems-based approach, if you think of yourself, or you think of your children like a planet. Let's say they're Earth, there are so many things that affect that planet, that Earth. And there are systems that are really close to home when you talk about things like pollution or global warming or different food webs, or different how people interact with the whole planet, or how animals interact with the planet. But also there's further ones. There's one that it may not be as obvious. And for a child, maybe how they like school is that really obvious system. So the school system is very obvious for the child. You can see how it affects their lives. But for Earth, we're also affected by other planets, and we're affected by the sun. And that's not as obvious. And I think in the whole course of history, you can see that it's not as obvious, because it took people a long time to figure out things like gravity and how gravity works and how gravity is affecting the Earth all the time, even from planets and solar systems and things that are galaxies that are so far away you can't see them without some high-powered telescopes. And so I think our idea of systems thinking for problems in our own lives is kind of the same, where some of them are very obvious. Some of the systems are, like I said, like school, are very obvious for students, and for kids. That affects them every day. You see that. It's easy to see. It's like if you were a caveman a long time ago, you could clearly see how, the animals outside of, the animals that live near you affected your environment, your community, or the plants near you affected your environment and community. But there's more systems that affect as you get further and further away from the object of interest, and those systems ones we haven't really explored yet. And I think that for a student or a child, when we talk about parenting, I think some of those systems are things parents aren't paying attention to, and not because they're neglectful or they don't mean to, but because they just don't see it yet. Just like early scientists couldn't see that there were other galaxies and gravity that was affecting things that happened on Earth, or that tides came from shifts in the moon. Like it's not easy to understand. And so what we want to look at is how are those further out systems affecting the child that's being raised. And so something even that let me get his name right, Bronfenbrenner talked about was 5 systems. Was microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and the chronosystem. And they got further and further out from the child. And so I think that there is, the microsystems are easy to look at, the mesosystem's not so bad to look at, more difficult after that. So if you're looking at, East versus Western culture, economies, the economy is affecting our kids, it's affecting children. It may not be so obvious, in your own home, but it is. It's affecting them. It's affecting the people that they're with. It's affecting other kids in their school, maybe more or less. And so that's affecting how they feel about themselves and others. And so parenting becomes really difficult with that lens of that understanding, which is why I think we're still in that observation period of trying to revolutionize kind of the way parenting works in our country. And then the final thing I really want to talk about was Sanjay talked about shifting the burden. And how that works. And so shifting the burden just means you're taking anything that you feel like is out of your hands when we blame the system. And so blaming the system is interesting because we are creating the system. So really you're saying, we didn't create this correctly. And the results we're seeing are based on the system that we've created, which is another kind of a hard thing to understand and look at, but we're creating the system. It's never wrong. It's giving us the results that we're trying to get. It gives us the results that we've created. So it's like a math equation. If you write the equation and you put a number, you put some data in, and you get a result that you don't like, it's not the equation's fault. You wrote the equation. So as a group, as a country, as a people, it's important for us to step away and say it's not the system's fault. We've created the system we've created, whether politically or communally or nationally, or however you want to look at the system. The systems that we've created, we've done. And so those are the things that we would need to look at to change in order to change parenting and how our kids, what the results of our kids' childhoods are, whether they become confident, successful, happy adults, or whether we keep kind of repeating the same pattern and we continue to kind of spiral more and more into, somewhat angry and frustrated and hopeless adults. And I think that probably covers most of what I wanted to talk about in this open essay. I can't wait to keep looking more into some of the ways parenting systems can change and how systems thinking could affect parenting, especially as my own kids get older and I get to experience new systems that they start to become a part of as they get older. Thank you for listening. I would be really happy to have a conversation with anyone who's watching this, or if there are comments that you might have, I would be very interested in hearing them. Thank you very much.